Part 4. Grains from Grass. As was said early on, grain was a paleo food, but only eaten as the last resort in the driest of times because it took so much work to harvest. Because of this, though, latrines became a natural laboratory for many of our most famous foods. Many of the seeds would survive through us, and we would spread their seeds, which helped them propagate. The seeds that we were more likely to eat then, over hundreds to thousands of years, were more likely to pass on genes. More or larger grains were ones we picked from the mix of genetic gradients, along with grains that came away from the chaff easier. Until at one point we decided that growing some strains of the grass was worth the time and effort and no longer the food of last resort. This is true for every grain on the planet we grow. Corn initially looked like this. Now we've bred it to become naturally soft to the point that we often consider it a vegetable. Rice, millet, wild rice, which is actually a Native American bred grain not related to rice, as well as many other ancient grains were all bred this way, initially as a starvation survival tool, and never as first choice until we defecated them enough that we put a significant impact on their genetic population to make them our first choice and give up some, if not all, of our mobile hunter-gatherer style. Rye had a weird story in that it evolved much later and unrelated to wheat and was considered a pest, but the ones that mimicked wheat more were less likely to be needed until it became a hardy grain of its own for cold climate regions. We then began seeing seeds not just as food, but as things we could replant, and tried a lot of other seeds. Peas and lentils became the next oldest seeds to the wheat variety. With these dried grains, we now had a food with a high calorie count that could last for years if not decades. We now had stuff, and property was worth fighting over. Arable land became valuable. Grains also had one extra function, which added to their advantage. When you let them get wet, and added time, they would produce a nice level of alcohol, which some scholars think may have tipped the scales from hunter-gatherer to agrarian.